Hey, what's up everybody, Nexil here. Today we're playing Kingdom Hearts Union Cross and we're going to be talking about the new Supernova Plus Kingdom Hearts 3 SF Sora that just dropped today in Global. Not to be confused with Strike Form Sora or with Second Form Sora, who are both also SF Sora. In this case, we've got Kingdom Hearts 3 San Fransokyo Sora. So as always, we are going to do our banner analysis. We'll talk about the medal a bit, skim over the draw odds, and finally talk about my thoughts and recommendations on whether or not I think you should be pulling for this medal. So as always, first things first, whenever a new banner drops, you always want to see how much time you have until the banner goes away. So in this case, we have until July 31st to decide if you want to pull, and that's only 11 days. Now remember, a lot can come out in 11 days. We could get a new medal, we could get new avatar boards, we can get skill enhancement boards for skills that we might need. So I always recommend waiting until the last day and see everything that's available to you before you decide to spend your jewels. Remember, your jewels are super valuable, and the same jewels that you had 2-3 years ago are the same value as the jewels that you have now. So I always recommend waiting till the last day and seeing everything that's available. In terms of the banner itself, it's pretty standard stuff by this point. So it's going to cost you 3,000 jewels for every single pull, and every single pull gets you the same amount of stuff that the past few banners have given you. So it gives you 3 Kingdom Hearts 3 medals, which are generally going to be used for sub slots. You're going to sell them for draw points, or you keep them for some sort of unique ability. Maybe you round out some buffs that you don't have. And you'll also be getting 1 trait medal every single pull for San Fransokyo Sora. You'll also get 6 5-star or higher medals, which will generally again be used for draw points. You sell them for draw points, or you keep them for things like sub slots. Every single pull also gets you 10 VIP coins, and remember, these VIP coins are good for any active banner all the way until the end of July. If you don't spend them by July 31st, you lose them by August 1st. So no matter which banner you pull from, whether it be San Fransokyo Sora, the Reaper, or the Sorcerer, just make sure you spend all your VIP coins before the end of the month. Finally, with the banner, you get 3 speed gems per pull, which is just icing on the cake. It's not the reason you pull. With this banner, you also are guaranteed a copy of Kingdom Hearts 3 San Fransokyo Sora within 5 draws. So we're looking at about 15,000 jewels just to get 1 copy of this medal. So let's go ahead and take a look at the medal itself. So really looking at San Fransokyo Sora, he's just an upright speed copy of the Xemnas B that we just got, except he does a different number of hits. So looking at San Fransokyo Sora, he's an upright speed medal that's tier 10, base strength of 49,011, which is about the new standard we're seeing. The past 3 medals that were released had that same level of strength. He's got a base defense of 21,591, which isn't anything particularly special, and he's got a multiplier that ranges between 19.44 to 20.54. Now, you're hitting that 19.44 whenever you're fighting a group of enemies. So if you're fighting 2 Heartless, if you're fighting 4 Heartless, you're going to be hitting that 19.44 multiplier, which is actually pretty low. We'd like to look at an average of, at the very minimum, around 20 to 21 at this point. In terms of the high end of the multiplier, which is only activated when you're only fighting 1 enemy or there are no parts left on the raid boss, it hits 20.54, which is right in the middle of that average. So truthfully, I think that this multiplier is below average to right on average, especially when you think of the fact that we have things like Kingdom Hearts 3 Dark Riku running around that have a multiplier of 50% of the time being 25. And remember that multipliers are very, very, very important for copy medals. Copy medals do not copy the strength of the medal they're copying. They only copy things like the multiplier. So the fact that you can take a copy medal and then copy a good multiplier makes it an even better copy medal, and it makes the target medal better too. In this case, having that lower to average multiplier means that any copy medal that's used with this only gets about a low to average multiplier. And remember that copy medals generally have a lower strength than the best medals in the game. So getting a lower strength plus a subpar multiplier is not really good in my opinion. He has a gauge cost of 2 to activate the special attack, and that's pretty good because it's still a low gauge cost. It means that you can use a plain attack boost max skill without having to worry about gauges. Remember that even with extra attack, this is only going to cost you 4 gauges without any form of SP reduction, and that's very easy to recover from with something like a Kingdom Hearts 3 Kairi A or a Kingdom Hearts 3 Naminé. Now this is where Sora differs from Xemnas B, where he does 6 hits as opposed to Xemnas's 13 hits. Now this can make a big difference when it comes to blue hit counter enemies. Remember that blue hit counter enemies, every single time a hit connects with that enemy, it decreases the count by 1 unless there's some sort of count manipulation. In this case, there's not. So San Fransokyo Sora does 6 hits with extra attack, that's 12 hits, and that's actually less than 1 activation of Xemnas B. Remember that the only real reason you want to be decreasing count is in order to use something like recovery buffing. If you don't know what recovery buffing is, I would definitely check out my video on it because it's starting to become more important as as one-turn buffers become better and better. So I definitely think that 6 hits is much more manageable than Xemnas B's 13 hits. So when we think about these medals, it's likely you're going to be using them with copy medals. So when we look at San Fransokyo Sora, it's -6 hits for just 1 cast. With extra attack, we're looking at -12. If you're looking at a copy medal with extra attack, you're looking at -24. So really, these hits affecting count can scale really quickly in a bad way, especially if the counter attack is something you don't want to get hit by. So for example, Nightmare Charithi in the Keyblade War, the special attack on Nightmare Charithi will, I believe, it poisons you and paralyzes you, and that could instantly shut down your game if you either get knocked out after being revived or if it skips medals that you desperately needed to activate. So 6 hits, pretty manageable as opposed to Xemnas B, but at the same time, decreasing count is something that you generally don't want to see. So let's go ahead and take a look at the special attack. So for 1 turn, San Fransokyo Sora will give you perfect buffs and debuffs for general, upright, and speed, bringing you as the player up to +15 and giving the enemy -15 on all of those stats. San Fransokyo Sora will also give speed metal strength plus 8,000, which is part of the new standard that we're seeing. He also gives special attack bonus plus 220%, which isn't relevant just because we rely on Supernova attacks to give us either plus 300% or plus 320%. Remember that those abilities don't stack, so it's not going to be 320% plus 220% plus your tier. It's going to be whatever the highest value one is plus the tier. And then in terms of any sort of effects that San Fransokyo Sora has, he does damage plus 1 enemy or 0 parts left. And I've said it before and I'll say it again, this is the worst damage plus condition, especially when the multiplier isn't super great, because that means whenever you're fighting multiple enemies, you're inherently hitting a low multiplier, which is not what you want to do. You want to be consistent with your multiplier and get the same amount of damage out no matter what your condition is. So 1 enemy or 0 parts left is still the worst damage plus condition in my opinion, but aside from giving yourself self-buffing and then that speed metal strength plus 8,000, this medal really doesn't do anything else. There's no gauge restoration, no count plus minus 0, 0 PvP utility, so honestly, it's just a damage medal that is self-buffing. Self-buffing is great, but the fact that it does nothing else is pretty bad. Now, let's look at the Supernova Attack for San Fransokyo Sora, which is unfortunately even more underwhelming than his special attack. So, activating the Supernova Attack for 1 turn will give all speed medals plus 12,000 strength, and then give special attack bonus plus 320% to all medals. Now, this is just a new standard that we've been seeing with things like KR24 or Supernova Plus Xemnas B. However, aside from those damage additions, it really does nothing else. It doesn't heal any of your gauges, it doesn't heal any of your HP, it doesn't do any sort of defense boost piercing, so really it's just a damage addition, but it gives you no utility, and that's bad because whenever we look at Supernova attacks, one thing we want to see is utility on command. So for example, bumping up a count when you need to, or increasing your gauges when you need to. Unfortunately, San Fransokyo Sora does none of this and is really just additional damage. If not to only make it worse, his Supernova Attack triggers before slot 1 when you're defending in PvP, and that's pretty bad unless you've got something to buff San Fransokyo Sora. So let's just say you have no other Supernovas that activate before slot 1, the only thing you have is San Fransokyo Sora, so when you're defending in PvP, first thing you're going to do is activate San Fransokyo Sora with no buffs, which means less damage, and in PvP, which is strictly a damage contest, you definitely want to be cranking out as much damage as possible. Now, looking at the draw odds, my recommendation stays the same, where if you can't mercy this medal, if you can't muster up the 17,000 to 18,000 jewels to 1, pull for this medal, and 2, give him perfect traits, I really don't recommend pulling. The odds of you getting this medal on the 2nd or the 3rd or the 4th pull are just so abysmal that doing that would be a waste of your jewels. If you can't mercy the medal, don't pull. That is the rule of thumb with any mercy banner. Now, in terms of my thoughts and recommendations on whether or not I think you should pull for this medal, just like with Xemnas B, I really don't recommend people pull for San Fransokyo Sora. The reason is that the toolkit is just so bad, and because it's so bad, it's not really useful for anything outside of PvE. There's no particularly good raid use. Actually, I don't like the damage plus condition because it makes it worse for raids, because for raids, you either want a single enemy damage multiplier that's really high, or something that's got really high spread damage. In this case, it does none of those two things, so not really good for raids. And then there's no PvP use minus buffing your other speed medals. So in terms of utility, the best that you've got with this medal is the count management and being able to use recovery buffing. Again, if you don't know what recovery buffing is, I would highly recommend just search it up, Nexil recovery buffing. It's a good guide on how to use it, but that's going to be the best utility that this medal has. So when you combine this medal with extra attack and recovery buffing, on its own, this medal can hit plus 60,000 speed medal strength, which is a lot of strength stacking, again with recovery buffing. So that's going to be the best use for this medal, even though it's got no utility outside of that whatsoever. However, we often want count to stay up because sometimes the counterattack, especially on high level enemies, can really be threatening. So for example, Sephiroth's counterattack didn't really defeat you, it didn't really knock you out, but it did give you a significant amount of debuffs. Another example, Nightmare Chirithi, where when the counterattack went off, would hit you with both poison and paralysis, and status effects are just really hard for some people to manage. So on average, we want to see that count going up, not down. So really, when we look at Fransokyo Sora, it's just vanilla damage. And remember what I say about damage medals, they get outclassed very, very, very quickly, but utility generally stays valuable. That's why I like medals like Final Fantasy VII Remake Tifa or Kingdom Hearts 3 Elsa, because they're not the strongest, not by a long shot, but their utility covers multiple areas of the game. So for example, with Tifa, I don't have to buy a separate PvE and PvP medal, which would be like 30,000 jewels. I buy one medal for 15,000 jewels, give it some traits, and then we're good for two different areas. We saved jewels because we didn't need to buy an additional medal. And remember, if tier 11s come out soon, then all the jewels that you spent on Fransokyo Sora are unfortunately going to go down the drain, because remember, with every single tier increase, we see about a 50 to 60% special attack bonus increase, which completely covers for the damage that makes Fransokyo Sora really good. So who do I think should pull? Well, whales who want to do super well in Colosseum, because it is a high damage medal. It still cranks quite a bit of damage. And I also recommend this for people who are struggling with speed content in terms of damage-based upright speed medals. In terms of upright speed medals right now, our best bet is Final Fantasy VII Remake Tifa and Kingdom Hearts 3 Sora and Riku. Now, I prepped this just to kind of give you an example of what makes a good staple medal and when you should start thinking about upgrading your setups. So this is Tifa, who I still think is the best upright speed medal in the game, because again, she has dual utility, so I don't need to buy separate medals for PvP and PvE. I use this medal for both of those fields. But when you really start thinking about replacing your staples, one good thing to look at is your damage content. Because remember, the damage is what passes events. I can't just say buy buffers, buy copy medals, but don't buy any of these other damaging medals, because the damage is what clears content. So this is the type of thing that I look at when it comes to should I buy this medal. So right now, my upright speed staple is Final Fantasy VII Remake Tifa. Now let's compare it to Fransokyo Sora, which is going to be the next best upright speed medal. So in terms of the strength, after factoring in for extra attack, the special attack, and the Supernova Attack, Fransokyo Sora is a lot higher by about 20,000 points over Tifa. Now, factoring in the multiplier, what we did is that we used Tifa's highest multiplier, which is 20.84, and compared it to Fransokyo Sora's lower multiplier, which is 19.44. After doing all the math, you can see the amount of damage difference that there is, and that's a 25% damage increase with Fransokyo Sora. So what you should be thinking about content is, oh, I didn't clear this content with what I've got right now. You know, I just needed that little bit of extra damage. Well, if that extra damage from the Sora can make the big difference for you, that's a medal that I think is worth pulling. Because when it comes to staples, the idea behind them is being able to clear content. It's very, very hard to clear the high level content with just buffers and copy medals alone. So one thing you really should be looking at when it comes to replacing your staples is, one, is that extra damage going to clear content? If you're clearing content just fine, you don't need to invest in a new medal. You can keep using the same one you've always been using. That's why I've been using Kingdom Hearts 3 Elsa ever since October of last year, because I have no problem passing magic content. And number 2, you want to think about the utility. So remember, utility lasts a while, but damage does not. Damage gets very easily replaced by medals with higher numbers. So the fact that Tifa covers both damage, I've been clearing content just fine, I don't need to replace my upright speed. But if you're looking at a medal like way back, like let's just say, for example, your best medal is going to be the free Supernova ++ Stitch that came out, maybe I'd consider getting San Fransokyo Sora, because that damage difference is just so incredibly high. And again, if you're not passing content with what you've got, you gotta replace something in terms of your damage output. So it's not enough alone to just have utility and copy medals. You gotta have damage medals as well. So that's my thought on it. Again, I think that you shouldn't pull for this. On average, like a solid 90-95% of the time, I'm recommending people don't pull for this. But if you're really struggling with upright speed content and you know for sure that this is going to help you pass it, I'd make it a recommendation. I think that's okay. But otherwise, it's a hard skip for me. So with that being said, that's the end of this video. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to leave them down in the comments below, and I'd be happy to answer when I have the time. If you'd like to join my Discord, get some additional help off hours, or ask any sort of questions when I'm not making videos, the link is right below the screen there. Just type it into your URL and you're good to go. But that's all for now. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, until next time, take it easy.